Welcome everybody to the How to Host a Professional and Engaging webinar. This is from Totara community as well. So welcome to absolutely everybody. And Maria from Turin in Italy, you've just said hello as well. Thank you very much for that, Marie. And really looking forward to having a chat with absolutely everybody here. And I'm just sharing some things in the chat window. So do make sure you've got that chat window open, because there are going to be loads of links that we are going to be sharing in there. My name is Jo. Let me start my video so you can say a proper hello to you. So my name is Jo Cook. It's my company, Lightbulb Moment. And what we focus on here at Lightbulb Moment is webinar and virtual classroom skills. We really focus on helping you get the design and the delivery and facilitation skills that you really need to make amazing, absolutely brilliant sessions and webinars and whatever it is that you're doing. Let's focus on what we're doing in the chat window. If you haven't already, please make sure that chat window is open. Just have a look at the bottom of your screen. You've probably got a speech bubble icon. Click that and it will open up chat. And also make sure that what you do is you set it to all attendees and panelists. So if you set it to all attendees, all panelists and attendees, it means everybody will be able to see what you are typing and not just me. Now, this is our agenda today. We are going to have a look through various different things in terms of what we need to do to host a webinar. We're going to look at, well, what is it that you do beforehand? How do you welcome people? And also, what is it that you do when you open up a professional webinar? How do you host throughout? And then, how do you actually close the webinar gracefully as well? So somebody else who has just said hello in chat is Michael. Michael is my producer, although you won't be hearing too much from him today, but he will share lots of hyperlinks for you, and you'll be able to go and find out a little bit more about what we do. So my next question for you is, why are you here? What do you want to get out of today's session? We're here for an hour. It's going to be a lot of me talking, but I really want to get your involvement via that chat window. So let's do that now. Let's use that chat window. Make sure it's set to all panelists and attendees, and just share with us, what is it you're here for the next hour for? What do you want to get out of this session? Let me just go back, or no, not forward. Let me just go back to the agenda for you. What is it you want from today's session? You could just be sitting back and enjoying. That's absolutely fine. Or you might be thinking, you know what? I always have a problem with this part. And that's where your questions are. So we're going to use that chat window to share ideas, to share thoughts, to share questions, but also we're going to use it so that you can share things with each other. So there are 25 of you here today. What are some of the things that you want from today's session? What are you here for today? What do you want from today's session? Adriana says, want to learn more about giving better webinars? We'll do our best. Duncan says, I deliver a couple of webinars a month, usually to a small audience, and could do with improving a bit on all the agenda points. Well, that's why we're covering a few of them, Duncan. Rachel says, strategies to get attendees engaged in a webinar, not just passively listening. Hopefully we'll cover that, Rachel. Vader, I apologise if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, says how to make the webinars engaging. Absolutely, really important. Claire says, I work for the NHS and we're setting up an LMS to cover the 8CCG in London. So I don't know what 8CCG is, Claire, maybe that's not too important. I'm also an IT trainer and have never delivered a webinar. Well, Claire, hopefully you're going to have a great time today. Jason says, currently using GoToWebinar for short-based courses, hoping to get out of the course how to design engaging content and try to overcome my fear of delivering webinars in respect of not being able to see the learner's face. Really great point here, Jason. We're going to cover some of those. Elton says, how does a webinar presentation differ from classroom delivery? What are the strategies to keep the learner engaged? We're going to touch on some of that, Elton. We're going to look here really more at how we are hosting webinars as opposed to all of the other design and facilitation elements, but we will touch on some of those things as well, I absolutely promise. And I've got loads of resources to share with you throughout that will be in the chat window. So webinars is where we're focusing today, and just to make sure we've got some clarity about that, it's partly about the software that we use. So we're using Zoom today. Also, we've had GoToWebinar mentioned by Jason, and there are hundreds of other platforms. It's also about having lots of people. Now, lots, that could be 20 people, or it could be 2,000 people. That's entirely dependent on you. It's a bit more broadcast. So we've got the chat window that I want you to use today, but we're not going to have your voices coming through on microphone. Laurie says, I do a lot of spur of the moment or short prep show and tell client meetings. I want to tighten up my presentation and make it as productive and pertinent to those joining me. Brilliant. Okay. So that's absolutely brilliant. What do we use webinars for? Let me open up this poll for you and go and select as many as are appropriate for you. So I've given you a few different things. It might be that you're thinking, actually, I'm doing something different. So Laurie, you know, you're doing something maybe a little bit different, but it's also for learning. So go in and select those as you see fit. Now, if you're having any problems at all, do let me know in the chat window, any problems with the poll or hearing me or seeing something, then just let me know. Okay, so we've got quite a few different things going on here, and let me end that and let me also share the results with you. So most of you, and I expected this, are using your webinars for learning. Absolutely brilliant. But some of you are also using this for marketing, sales, getting information out there. And if you put other, let us know in the chat window what that means. So I am going to concentrate on the learning part and the information dissemination, but we're also going to sprinkle in the bits to do with marketing and to do with sales as well. So it's really useful to know that. Now, our webinars use in all sorts of areas of business has absolutely exploded over the recent years. And you can see this information here is from ReadyTalk. It's an infographic that they have put together. And it just gives you a flavour of how people are using it in marketing for leads, about how many registrations are turned into qualified leads, and also the conversion of kind of sales. So if you're here from a marketing point of view, it's really important to focus on this. Now, if you're thinking, I can't see those numbers properly, you can just close that poll down. You can either close it or you can get it out of the way somehow so that you can focus on the PowerPoint that we've got coming up. So let me paste you a link to this infographic so that you can go and have a look at that in your own time if you want to. There's another piece of research that I want to share, and this is from Towards Maturity. Now, they're quite well known in the learning area, but if you haven't come across them before, I'm going to get Michael to share a link to the report. This is the Preparing for the Future of Learning Focus report. And what they found is, from over 600 L&D leaders around the globe, is that a huge number of companies are using live online learning in some fashion, in some way. Specifically, nearly half are using virtual classrooms. Whichever way you look at this, webinar, virtual classroom, live online learning, as far as I'm concerned, this is a good thing. What we are focusing on is the hosting of a webinar and actually doing the bit, not necessarily the content piece in detail, but how you do the overall hosting. So let's have a look through this sequentially, starting, fair enough, before we even start the webinar. There are three main areas at this point. There's the planning and the consultancy part, the setting up of your platform and your event, and the rehearsal as well. So let's have a look through these. The planning and consultancy part, if you're dealing with a speaker as opposed to just yourself, so it's either way you look at this, you need to deal with either yourself or you need to have your speaker deal with the fact that they can't see people. And it can feel that people are really remote. We can go into lecture mode, and we have to help either ourselves or our speakers understand that there are people at the other end of the computer screen and that they're engaging real people. We also have to help them understand the basics of the platform. So there's a link in the chat window. Go and click on that to come back to a little bit later on. Just an article I wrote about a group that you can't see. What's it like and how do you engage them? Because it can mean that they feel really remote, and we don't want that. Let's have a look at those platform basics. So what I want to do with the platform basics is, well, what is it that either you or your speaker need to know? So in that chat window, think about whatever platform you use, Zoom, GoToWebinar, Adobe Connect. If you're thinking about a speaker that you're hosting, or if you're thinking about yourself, what are the absolute basic parts of that platform that you need to know? So be quiet whilst you think and type. So what is the best or the most basic points of the platform that we need either the speaker or yourself to know? What are those points? So Nicola says, managing my content, switching between screens, polls and other interactions, and screen sharing, recording, managing audio. Brilliant answers. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Rachel. Duncan says, clear understanding of the tools available, the chat, the participant view. Yeah. And some of this will depend on the different tools that you've got and the platform that you use. It will depend a little bit on what you've got going on. What other ideas? What are some of the basic things that either you or a speaker need to do on a webinar, that if you're helping somebody who's presenting or delivering a webinar, what are the basic things they need to do or know? So yes, Duncan, things like who are the audience? So I'm not concentrating quite so much on the content part today, but you're absolutely right. Are they basic users? Are they advanced users? Have they been on webinars before? All sorts of different things that you need to know. So I think some of those, all of those things that you've come up with in that chat window, you are absolutely spot on about those. I think some of the absolute basics that we need to focus on is, first of all, how do they connect and control their microphone or their telephone connection? Because that's really important. Obviously, we want to hear people. And then the second level is, do they sound loud enough? Is it good enough quality? Are you getting loads of pops and hisses or feedback? There's all of that audio part. But as long as we could hear them in the first instance, and they know how to mute, that's a really important point as well. You've probably been on webinars where you can hear all sorts of stuff going on in the background, or they're going, no, I'll come back to you later, I'm on a webinar. And you're thinking, please mute. I'm sure that you've had those kind of experiences before as well. Another of the basics that they need is to use the chat window. Now, you guys are using that brilliantly today, but they need to be able to see what other people are typing. So, you know, if I was the host and we had a separate speaker today, I want the speaker to at least know how to get to the chat window and look at it. It's a whole different skill set to keep up with a busy chat window, but I want them at least to be able to do that. Also, we need them to be able to know, well, how do you communicate with the host? So if you've got a host and a speaker, or you've got a couple of different people on the webinar, Well, how are you going to communicate? Because it's actually not very professional to come on and go, oh, am I next? Or are you next? What's going on? So we want it to be a little bit more like a TV broadcast or a radio broadcast, where we have some smooth transitions going on and we're making sure that we can communicate with each other. And we'll come back to this point a little bit later on. Now, also earlier on, we had mentioned in the chat the GoToWebinar software. The GoToWebinar software is a little bit different because it doesn't actually have a chat window. It's got one between individual presenters, but it doesn't have one for the audience. Now, I've got a blog on that, and Mike will share the link for you. It's just thoughts about how we use the chat window in a webinar scenario. Okay. So let's have a look at, now something is going a little bit wrong on my screen. There we are, that's what I wanted. Also, we need, right, I'm going to pause for a second here, guys, because there is something going a little bit weird on my screen. Let me sort that out. So what I wanted to do, let me just share that, that blog link with you. I think Michael must be going off and dealing with something. Oh, there he is. He's got it after all. So one of the other things that we need to do is, if people are using slides on their webinar, and as usually they probably are, as a basic, they just need to know how to move on and advance through their slides. You're absolutely right what you were saying earlier on. Nicola mentioned switching between screens and also polling. Rachel said screen sharing, for instance. So that's really important too. And Zoom that we're using today, for example, is using screen sharing. So it's really important to know how to use those things, but the absolute basics are there. This is partly about you as a host really knowing your software. And if you're the person delivering as well, then you'll be doing both of those roles. So some platforms have a perpetual room that's always there. You set it up in advance, and Adobe Connect is a good example of this. You can set everything up you want, and it's there forever, basically, until you delete it. Others, like WebEx, you set up on the day. And then something like Zoom that we're using today, well, I've got the polls already in kind of the back end, in the website part of it, all ready to launch in the session when we go today. So you really need to know your platform ahead of time so that you can make those decisions. Some of the other things that you need to know are about the materials. So in the chat window, what are the kind of materials that you would often use in your webinar? So I've mentioned slides already, so there's one. In that chat window, what are some other materials that you might use in your webinars? Just make sure in that send to option, you've got all panelists and attendees, and then everybody will see your answers. So what other kind of materials might you use in your webinars? Laurie, you've put before and afters. Can you just tell us a bit more about that, please? What other materials do you typically use or imagine you might want to use? Duncan says resource links. So yeah, absolutely great. I've done loads of those in chat, and Mike's helping out with that as well. Or it could be documents, whole documents that you want to load, or it could be documents you want to link to. Really good. Mary and Natasha both say videos. Thank you. And Elton saying job aids, polls, quizzes. It could be media like audio or video, copies of the slides. That's a really good point. Speaker bios, all sorts of stuff there, Elton. Thank you. Laurie says with regards to the before and afters, what theirs looked like and what it could look like. Okay, so that's something a bit more specific. Thank you, Laurie. Jason says, for systems training, I sometimes do a live view of a new system and share a PDF reference guide. Oh, I really like that idea, Jason. And Laurie says it's to showcase the tools, not realise. Thank you, Laurie. So all sorts of different materials, and we need to know in our webinar platform for that session, how are we going to do that? So links today, we're just pasting those into the chat window. Some things like WebEx and Adobe Connect, they actually have a whole section where you can preload links in there if you want to, and you can, you know, especially in Adobe Connect, you can use them again and again. It could be that the polls you just make one for that session as a one-off. Or it could be that actually what you do is you load those up, and different systems work in different ways. With Zoom, you set it up in the back end. With WebEx, you can actually save a file and load that into each session. So it's really important just to know, do I share my slides and my materials as a screen share? Do I do a desktop share or an application share? They're different things. Do I upload my slides? And then what problems are involved with that and that we have to get around? So they're all different things that you need to know about so that you can either do that for yourself or advise your speaker. Laurie says, I do like to turn over control of my screen for the participants to actually do the action that will change what I'm showing as a before and after. I love that, Laurie. That is a perfect example, because it could be really engaging to show me, but actually if I can get control and go and press the buttons, and you can say, oh no, not that button, or go and type things in, and we can all work on things together and share that around different people, it takes longer, but much more engaging, and I learn much more. Laurie, you've gone top of the class. Thank you so much for that. Some of the other things that we need to be thinking about also include the speaker login. So again, different systems work in different ways. Do you need to invite them as a speaker? Do you just give them the link to the session, and then when they join, you give them speaker rights or host rights? Again, it's really dependent upon your software and how that works. But you need to know about that so that you can make sure that you're not waiting for them, that you've got the right rights for them, that if they want to do something in the software, they can. These are all really important things. Another section that's important before the webinar is rehearsal. Now, I heard this morning. Michael Caine has a new book out, and they read this quote out this morning, and he says that rehearsal is the work and that the performance is the celebration. I loved that quote, and I had to put that in my webinar today. And this works for webinars too. So in that chat window, how many of you do a rehearsal for your webinars? Just put a yes or a no or a maybe or a sometimes. So how many of you do some kind of rehearsal for your webinars? So we've got all sorts of results. We've got an emphatic always from Nicola. Thank you. A few yeses in there. Duncan's put sometimes. Elton says sometimes. It depends on the topic and the audience. Thank you very much. So it's going to be different answers for different people and at different times. I think a rehearsal of some kind is really, really important, because you need to know, well, who's doing what and when? Who does the introductions? How do we hand over? Is there any handover? Is it just one person speaking all the time? Or is somebody going to be speaking as well? And do we interrupt each other? Do we have a really secret kind of handshake of over to you, Bob? Or do we kind of go, Bob, what do you think? How do we do all of that? Laurie says, I do a minimum of a half-hour prep, but having them sometimes on the spot. I just really need to know or offer to reschedule a proper demo. Yeah, and this kind of rehearsal or demo can be different in all sorts of different situations. It could just be, here's the basic technology, you know, that microphone and things like how to control the slides and things like that, and then a walkthrough of the format. Or it could be a full-on 1 hour, let's do it like live, let's have some participants with us and do a proper rehearsal to see where those little niggly problems are, to see where we didn't script it very well, maybe to see, oh, I thought you were doing that bit. And I've had all sorts of these different things. We also need to then practice, well, how are we going to communicate with each other, as I mentioned earlier on? How do we communicate about timing? What needs to change? Maybe we don't have enough questions to engage people. So you'll notice all the way through, I've been asking you questions for you to respond in the chat window. Maybe there's not enough of those. Maybe we've got just way too much material, and that by the end of our rehearsal, we're only halfway through. Well, you know what? We'll need to change things. If you change things, do you do another rehearsal? Again, let me know in the chat window. Yes, no, maybe. What are the circumstances? So if you change things, do you do another rehearsal? If you change things, do you do another rehearsal? If you're not sure, you can just put not sure. That's absolutely fine. So Nicola says yes. Duncan says, if possible. Not always, though. Absolutely right, Duncan. It's not always possible. Life just happens, doesn't it? Laurie says, not usually. I just adjust. And again, it depends upon your experience or how much you've changed. So that's absolutely fine, Laurie. And Jason says, not always. Yeah. So it could be, you know what, we've just gone through, we've got a few tweaks, we're happy and we're ready to go. Or it could be we've made quite a few changes and we need another kind of meeting together. Does it have to be a full-on dress rehearsal? Well, no, of course not. It could just be, right, yes, we're doing part A, part B, part C. Let's just check this 5 minutes here and do that as a test and make sure that we're happy with how that's going to work. So it can work in all sorts of different ways. So this is all been before we actually even get to the live session. Let's focus a bit more on the live session, actually on the day. And before you get to the webinar proper, like we did at kind of 3 o'clock UK time today, you'll need to plan for that 5, 10, 15 minutes before you start, where you'll be welcoming people. So what do you do to welcome people before the start time? So maybe people have logged in 5 minutes early, 10 minutes early. It depends upon the culture of the organization and how your software works. If people have logged in early, what do you do to welcome them? If you're the host, what do you do, or what should you do? Or what do you like seeing others do? What do you like seeing others do? Or it could be dislike if you want to. So what kind of things do we do to welcome people? Duncan says, I say hello, introduce the chat. Not much more if I'm honest. Duncan, I like honest. Honest is always good. So you've got some basics in there. That's good, Duncan. It's a really good start. Nicola says, I have a countdown timer on a slide that lets them know how long until the webinar starts. It also explains that they are on mute. That is a really good couple of ideas there, Nicola. Thank you so much. I used to do the countdown timer a bit more in my virtual classrooms. I tend to do it in chat and just audibly these days, but I love that idea. That's really good. Laurie says, small talk. That's a really good one. I attended a webinar earlier on today with Martin Cousins and a load of other people on a panel, and the small talk was all about the Great British Bake Off, which I think the final is tonight. Now, I'm a couple of episodes behind, so I had my fingers in my ears going la 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 la, but some kind of small talk can be really good. Laurie says, where they are, since many meetings are a jumble of remote peeps, and how are the fall colours and so on. Yeah, so I always joke that because I'm British, I have to talk about the weather, but you're absolutely right. Everybody can talk about where are they, what's the weather, maybe what they can see out of their window. Even if they don't have a window, they can say they don't have a window. So those kind of things are really good universal questions. Megan says, have some type of engagement activity to get to know each other. Absolutely brilliant. And your mind can run riot on that. All sorts of different things that you can do. Megan, sorry, I've said Megan's piece. Duncan says, I feel I could do more though. And Duncan, that's exactly why you're here. There's all sorts of different ideas, and it's for you to decide which ones that we talk about today could you do? And it could be you have a whole list of ideas, and then you think, I'll try those couple, and then I'll try those couple. Just experiment and see what's really good. Jason says a welcome screen with details of the webinar and some pointers of what to expect, and the muted microphones. The muted microphones is a really good point. I delivered a webinar the other day, or I was hosting a webinar, sorry, for somebody else, and people were saying, oh, I can't speak, I can't get my microphone. And for that exact reason, unfortunately, it was a little bit out of my control, but we didn't tell them you're on mute. So you're absolutely right. That was one of the things that we had to kind of say in the moment in the chat window. And Laurie says, I always try to be there first. Oh, well done, Laurie. That is an absolute must to be there first. I think you're absolutely right in all of those things that you say. One of the things that I like to do is have all sorts of links and phrases to hand ready to go in another document. And it allows me to copy and paste. So let me do an example here about changing to all kind of participants so that everybody can see. Maybe I want to share that I'm on Twitter. Maybe it's around about kind of how to link in with me. And it can be all sorts of things. It means I don't have to sit here typing, because for one thing, you can hear my typing. I can't talk and type at the same time. I get distracted easily, but I've just got a text document and I flick to it and copy the irrelevant kind of piece of text or material, and all of those kind of things are really useful to have. We also need to make sure that once we've got everybody welcomed, that actually we open professionally. So this is where we start at maybe the top of the hour, let's say, like I did at 3 p.m. So tell me in the chat window, what are some of the opening steps that we could do? What are some of the things that you do that are really important at the very beginning of your webinar? What are some of the points, the things, the steps that you think are really important at the beginning of a webinar? What do you do? So you're at the top of the hour, you're ready and raring to go. What do you actually do? What are some of the things that you do? What are some of the things that other people do that you like? So Duncan says general housekeeping, confirm the times, the agenda, the recording information, all really good stuff, Duncan. Adriana says, thanks to everybody. I really like that. Introduce the speakers, really good, and explain the agenda, loving it. Laurie says, I don't type during meetings. Instead, I use my iPad to write notes and then convert them to text. The app does it, so my keyboard is not distracting. I also think it's good for attendees to see me handwriting instead of wondering what I'm typing. Really good points there, Laurie. Thank you. I might have to have a play with that. And Irma says, welcome the listeners, introduce yourself. So many people forget that, but it's really important. Inform them of what they can and cannot do, and inform them of the program. Yeah, those things like this is chat, or there's emoticons, or there's you're all on mute. All of those things are really good. Thank you, Irma. Nicola says, always welcome the participants and thank them for joining. So important. Ask them to say hi in the instant message, and then take them through a few slides that introduces the host and the speaker with a photo and the housekeeping. Great, Nicola. So many people don't like a photo of themselves, and I include me in that, but it makes it real. That's really important. Laurie says, always send a reminder email with an agenda the day before. Really good. Adriana says, also tell them they can ask questions through the chat, but we will answer all at the end. Adriana, that's kind of a format or a structure decision. So some webinars will do that. Absolutely fine. Other webinars will do it during. So that's something you need to decide in the rehearsals. If that's how you do it, absolutely, and let people know. Other sessions, it could be throughout. And you've given me a smile there. Thank you, Adriana. Nicola says photos, important internal networking. Yeah, it's really good for networking. Jason says open up the attendee list, check the audience view to make sure the screen is refreshing. Explain a hand waiver on GoToWebinar to get my attention if they're having any problems. Loving that, Jason. And the audience view is really important. You can do that on a second computer, even just like a dodgy old laptop or your tablet, something like that. Laurie says, I do also like to do a round-robin introduction so everyone know who all are there. So that can be really good if you've got 2 or 3 speakers. Brilliant. And Laurie says it lets the attendees know if you will be recorded and when you turn it on. Absolutely brilliant list, everyone. Thank you so much for that. Let me kind of go through a few things that I've come up with. So you're absolutely right about those introductions. Who's the company or department that's running the webinar or sponsoring it? Whichever way that works for you, you need to make sure that's in there. Also, as you've said, you need to introduce yourself as host. 30 seconds is all it needs so that somebody knows who you are and what you are doing. And then, as you said, what's the session like? What's the structure? When are the questions coming through? What am I able to do, such as muting or unmuting? How long is the session? All really good stuff. We also, in those opening steps, need to make sure, exactly as you've said, that people know if we're recording and what that availability is. Is it going to be available completely publicly on the internet? Or is it maybe only internally in my company, my department, or something else? Because that might make a difference on whether I stay and on what I do and how I say it and what I share. So that's really important information. Also, in that opening steps, we need to introduce our speaker and at some point maybe hand over to them. Or if it's us ourselves, just kind of make a very subtle distinction between introduction and let's get on with the content. So who's doing an introduction to a speaker? Am I just saying, this is Bob who works for such and such. Bob, tell us more about yourself. Or am I doing a full-on introduction and then Bob just says, thanks, Joe, and then dives into the content? It's those kind of things that you really need to know. And likewise, again, as I was just saying, make sure that you have your links handy in your document, relevant to who your speakers are or what your topic is. So I've got one I'm pasting in right now, ready to go, so that you can just have those things there. You don't have to go and look it up. You don't have to type it, whilst either you or they are doing the work. Let's turn our focus now to actually during the webinar. So we've done the before, we've done the opening section, we're now well into the webinar and things are going on. The very first thing I recommend is that you need to be present, you need to be involved throughout. What's the problem if you aren't involved? If you just kind of switch off a bit, maybe kind of load your email, maybe you're checking Twitter, what's the implication? What's the problem? So let's assume you've got a speaker or a presenter and you're the host, as opposed to like today, I'm doing both of those things. But if you've got a speaker and as host, you kind of switch off after your introduction bit, what's the problems? What's going to happen? In that chat window, what's the problem of not being present? What are some of the things that might happen? Maybe the things that you've seen in webinars before. Really good point from Irma. The rest will also leave, at least in focus. Yeah, you're not setting a very good example, are you, Irma? Well, not you personally, Irma. You'll be setting a great example, I'm sure. Nicola says you lose participant confidence and motivation to keep interacting. Absolutely. It's about modeling good behavior. Laurie says you forget everything. Yeah, absolutely. And if we're not present, actually it can be really hard to be on the ball. So if suddenly the presenter says, what do you think, Joe? And I haven't really been listening or paying attention, you know, it's like it's put me on the spot a little bit. Or if they say, you know, if they suddenly just log out and there's no audio from them, and I don't know whereabouts we are, you know, I can't cover for them, it all gets a little bit tricky and very, very stressful. And we'll come back to this point a little bit later on as well. Also, one of the other reasons we need to be present in the session is if there are any technical issues. Not only is our speaker going to panic, but so are our attendees, and they're going to have problems. And Laurie says, oh, or you start talking while you're on mute and all the good stuff doesn't get heard. And he's laughing there. Laurie, I can't tell you the number of times I've been doing that. And then in the chat window, all I can see is Joe there? It's gone silent. What's happened? And it's because I've said the most interesting thing but been on mute, unfortunately. So we need to help our attendees with maybe some problems they're having. Things like how do they connect to the audio so they can hear or speak if that's appropriate. Where's chat, such as today, I had a screen grab showing you how to load it, I had changed to all panelists and attendees. Is the session being recorded? So it's really important to have that. Again, I've got my little notepad document and I can just copy and paste in there if somebody asks the question in chat. So I've got that ready to go. It's really important. And there are many other technical issues. Some of those we discuss on the Lightbulb Moment podcast. So what Mike's going to do is he's going to paste a link in there. We've got podcasts and all sorts of other topics as well. But I thought it might be useful to see one on or hear one on technical issues. So he'll paste that in there for you. One of the other things that we need to do as a host is really get involved in the chat window. So why is that important? In the chat itself, why is it important that you as the host get involved in that chat window? Why is it important that you as the host get involved in that chat window? So why is it important that you as the host get involved using that chat window? Let's look at what you've said. It starts the ball rolling, says Duncan. Absolutely it does. Nicholas says lead by example and make it easier for everyone to get involved. Yes, that's exactly it, Nicola. Laurie says it's your meeting to keep focus and flow productive. Really good point there, Laurie. We have to be a little bit careful on that. I have seen people typing into the chat window things like this. So if I type that into the chat window in capital letters, keep on topic, what's your response to that? So just put in the chat window, what's your response to that? So I've put in there, keep on topic. That's me managing the chat. If I had put that in there as the host trying to manage the chat, what would your response to it be? Duncan says, keep your nose out. Thank you, Duncan. Nicholas says, it makes me want to pull back. Yeah, I mean, especially in capitals, it's like, keep on topic is kind of what I'm saying there. Jason's put their arms folded. Yeah, I can just see the kind of the head wobble now, just like, I'm not happy. Laurie says, as an attendee, I would go silent for the remainder. Yeah, I've been on a webinar where somebody has done that. And actually, as a webinar host and presenter myself, there was nothing going wrong with the chat. People were getting involved and doing things and talking, and that's really important. So don't worry, I'm not going to really do that to you. Let's go back to what we had before. So Laurie, you were absolutely right about keeping the focus and the flow productive, obviously in a really positive way. Jason says, so participants don't think there's a one-way street and that you are really listening to them. I really hope that's how you guys feel today, because whilst, you know, you're not here and unmuting and talking, I really feel that we're having a conversation. Yeah, it's a conversation with quite a few of you because it's a webinar. It's not the same as a meeting or a Skype meeting or a virtual classroom, but We're really having some things going on, and I'm starting to get to know a little bit of what some of you are like and a little bit of your humour and what your approaches are. So it's all really important to comment on things, ask questions. You can get people involved and say, well, tell us more, and so on and so forth. It really makes the difference. Let me ask you another question now, because managing time on webinars can be a real challenge. Oh, let's go and see what Laurie says. Laurie says they appreciate knowing you are respectful of their time if the meeting is scheduled to be a specific amount of time. So as the host, you need to move through the agenda and note things to follow up. Really good point, Laurie. That goes absolutely brilliantly to what I'm talking about here about managing time. So let's think about this as you are hosting a webinar and you have at least one speaker. You might have more. So you've got people there presenting, and they may or may not have the kind of skills that you've got. How do you communicate with your speaker? So you've got somebody there presenting. How do you keep on track with them? How do you tell them they're ahead or behind of time, or they've missed a question or anything? How do you do that? So in the chat window, how do you do that? So we need to make sure we've got some way to keep in communication during the live element of our broadcast. But how do you do that? There's all sorts of scenarios where you need to make sure you have some kind of back channel or way of communicating. What are some of those things that you do or could do or have seen people doing? Maybe it's, what does your software allow? So we talked about GoToWebinar earlier on, and whilst there isn't a chat for people in the same way that we're using today, there is a chat between panelists and presenters. So there's like a private chat area, which is quite good. So Nicola says, have a separate instant messaging outside of the webinar. That is so important. So it doesn't have to be technically outside the webinar, Nicola. It could be inside, like with GoToWebinar. Adobe Connect has a presenter-only area, like behind the scenes, and you can have presenter chat there. But you're absolutely right. It could be outside the webinar as well. So Michael is here today supporting me a little bit. And you know what? We've got a Skype window open. And there was something earlier on that wasn't working quite as well as it could have done. So he just sent me a message saying, I think you need to go full screen. And I forgot to tell you to close the poll. So he told me it might be worth telling people they need to close the poll. So that was all through Skype. And it really helps me to make sure that I'm doing as good a job as possible. And Michael says, I'm the secret weapon. Yeah, I did say he's supporting me a little bit. I am doing most of the work, Mike. I just want to highlight that. So you do need to make sure you have practiced some way of communicating and get to know what it is in your system. Jason says we use WhatsApp on our business phones, so you could set up a group chat. There's a good idea. There's always benefits and minuses of that because it's not on the screen in front of you, but it's a different way of doing it. Maybe what's on the screen in front of you is actually quite difficult to do. So WebEx, for example, if you want to send a private chat, a bit like in Zoom, you have to click the drop down, choose the person, type the chat, and then set it back to all attendees if you want to, and then it comes up in the flow of the chat with everybody else. So that can be actually quite distracting. So one of the things I tend to do if I'm hosting is, let me practice, put this in, is I would put something like a load of stars in there and put in capitals what's going on. Because then if you look at the flow of the chat window now, that sticks out a little bit more. So it's all about knowing your platform and how you want to use it. So WhatsApp, great idea. You could use that if everybody's practiced it and actually pays attention to it. That's the key part. Laurie says, I will bring up the agenda as a reminder of the other items to address. So sometimes an attendee will suggest something to be tabled or discussed offline. Mention people by name to see if they had anything to add and to see if there's a consensus to move on. So that's a really good way of driving things. And Adriana says in Zoom you can chat privately. Absolutely you can. As long as you have practiced it and you make sure that your speaker pays attention to it. And I've been in more webinars than I care to tell you, where for whatever reason I'm kind of going behind the scenes going, we're behind, you need to move this, you need to do that. And they're paying no attention whatsoever, just because they're not used to it. It's not their skill set. So in the end, I've had to unmute and go, so Bob, gosh, time's running away from us. Let's skip on to such and such a topic, which is a really polite way of me going, get on with it. So you really need to make sure you have your communication there and sorted out. So one of the very last points that I wanted to make here for this section, and the whole point of being present, is you need to make sure you're gathering questions. I saw a webinar the other day and the host said at the end, are there any questions? And there weren't any, and then there was a bit of tumbleweed and silence, and they didn't have any questions and hadn't planned anything. And they said to the speakers, well, are there any questions from you? And the speakers kind of went, no. And it was all just a bit of ending with a whimper. So just make sure you copy and paste things, or you make notes somewhere, or things that you think of. So even if there's nothing at the end, you can say, hey, Bob or Alice, really great presentation. Can you just clarify one thing, or can you just expand on such and such, to make it feel like a real full ending? And speaking of ending, this is where we need to focus our time now, which is making sure we have a really good quality closing and we don't just go, that's it, that's the end, and kick you out of the software. So we mentioned earlier on actually saying welcome and thank you to the participants. We need to say thank you, obviously, to the speaker and have handy all of their details in that document, as I mentioned, that you can share. So as it is today, I've got it about me, but I would normally have, this is our speaker, Alice, and their details and their website and so on. And just say thank you to them for their time. That's really important. And share their contact details. Duncan says, if you are the host and presenter, how can you drive question interaction? Any tips? Duncan, what have you picked up from the session today? I haven't necessarily overtly covered it, but I'm really hoping that I've modelled good practice and you've picked something up. And if you haven't, Duncan, that's fine. I'll be more overt. Laurie says, I copy the agenda and add bulleted notes discussed during the meeting, then email shortly after, asking for clarification if they see a need. Really good, Laurie. Thank you very much. One of the other things that we need to do that often we don't always do, and that's actually thank the attendees. Now, you guys were on this earlier on, which is really important, but you guys have given up your time or invested your time in being here. So that's really important to thank them. And lastly, it's all about the signposting. So it could be, like I shared about LinkedIn, it could be kind of sharing all of those kind of links that you've got ready to go, but also whatever is appropriate for your organisation, webinar, about where to go for more information, to sign up, for help, who the people are, what the next session is there a programme, whatever is appropriate for you there. So Duncan says, with regards about kind of driving question interaction, a classroom-esque pause for response. I really like that, Duncan. So I've used silence today. Hopefully you guys have picked up on that, that sometimes I'm quiet, not always, but sometimes, to give you time to think, to give you time to type and share things. Some of the other things you need to do, Duncan, are make sure that you've got questions to drive that interaction from the very beginning. And I've done that today within a few slides. I said, what are you guys here for? We had a poll at the beginning and we focused a little bit on what those contents are throughout the session. And I've asked you guys loads of questions. And today, a little bit slower to get started, but that's just normal in a webinar. And as we continued, you guys were really quick and really great at sharing all sorts of different things. So asking that throughout, so then you can pick up on those questions as you go. That's my preferred method. But if you're doing a webinar with hundreds of people, that can get a little bit challenging. And therefore, something like a question panel or somebody moderating the chat and the question to ask those questions later is important. So something like that. I'm really hoping that's helped, Duncan, but you've got all my contact details there. And go and ask that question on our community and see what other people come up with as well. It would be a really great way to go and have a think about that. Absolutely my pleasure, Duncan. I can't believe we're at the last few minutes of our webinar. This time always goes so quickly. So in that chat window, I'd like to know from you, what's your light bulb moment from today? What have you learned? So it could be that you've learned it completely new. It could be something that actually you already knew it and it's just reminded you, it's refreshed it for you. So it could be something you've learned again. It could be something you've experienced today that's a bit different or reminded you of something. So in that chat, please share what's your light bulb moment from today's webinar. Your light bulb moment from today's webinar. Laurie says, this was fun to hear everyone's suggestions. Thank you, Laurie. Absolutely. That's why the chat window is so important. It's why it's really important to ask questions and get everyone involved, because it's not just me you learn from. Excellent point, Laurie. Duncan says, a classroom-esque pause for response. I need to practice this. It does take practice, Duncan. I find having a really nice cup of coffee helps, because whilst people are thinking and typing, you can take a sip of drink like I'm going to right now. Maybe it's a bit too late in the day for coffee, but never mind. What else have we got? Nicola says 3 things. Conveying the department running the event, having notes to copy and paste as the host, getting more involved with the chat. Thank you. Absolutely my pleasure on that one. Really, really important. What else do we have? We always have from Adriana says, I always forget how to show screenshots of the platform. Sorry, let me reread that, Adriana. I always forget to show screenshots of the platform. Now I will do it. Also about showcasing our LinkedIn and Twitter account. Yeah, not everyone's on Twitter. Not everyone wants to link in, but you're giving them the opportunity if they want to. Irma says the ending with a question if no one has one. Really good. Jason says, great refresher. We use more polls to keep the audience engaged. And I don't have my photo on my first slide, so my audience can see who I am, but I will from now. Brilliant, Jason. Love it. And Duncan says, oh, yes, copying and pasting too. Yeah, really important. Well, thank you so much for all of those things. And I'm really, really appreciative of your time today. Now, you've got some of my contact details there already. You've got my community link, you've got Twitter, you've got LinkedIn. You can go and find out more details about me on all of those things. The other thing I've got is an absolute last chance today and tomorrow to go and fill in a little bit of research about your skills development for live online. And if you do that, there's the potential that you can get a huge launch discount for some webinar series that we're going to be launching soon for continuous professional development. So thank you very much, everybody. If you've got any questions that I haven't covered, please stay and let me know what they are. Otherwise, feel free to log out and enjoy the rest of your day. You've been an absolutely fabulous audience. Go and follow me on Twitter. Let me know what you think. And go and join us in our free community and let's get some discussion going. And thank you so much to Totara community as well for hosting this webinar. I think it's been an absolutely great one. So thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.